The 2016 presidential election has once again brought the controversy of female reproductive health to the forefront of our country's attention. The debate between the morality of abortion and contraceptives and the constitutionality of limiting such things has been seemingly revitalized with the inauguration of the first conservative president in nearly a decade. President Donald Trump recently signed legislation that would cut federal funding to Planned Parenthood and other organizations that provide abortions as well as birth control. Recent actions and statements such as those made by the Trump administration in April have not only sparked debate over abortion, but also instigated arguments of the government's deliberate suppression of individual rights. Modern development during the 1950s and 1960s catalyzed a steady ousting of traditional Christian morals and gave way to the rise of a permissive and accepting society capable of greater sexual freedom and experimentation. Many refer to this growth of free love as the sexual revolution. It was a social movement that challenged traditional codes of behavior related to sexuality and interpersonal relationships throughout the Western world from the 1960s to the 1980s. It normalized things like contraception, pornography, premarital sex, homosexuality, and abortion. In 1953, Chicago resident Hugh Hefner founded Playboy, a magazine which targeted adult males between the ages of 21 and 45. The magazine contained a lot of content, the most crucial being half-naked female playmates posing provocatively. In 1969, Blue Movie, directed by Andy Warhol, was the first erotic film to receive national theatrical release in the United States. Being the first of its kind, it was surprisingly well met by viewers and critics alike, and gave rise to the pornography industry. The development of the birth control pill in 1960 gave women access to easy and reliable contraception. The demise of the Comstock laws in 1936 set the stage for promotion of available, effective contraceptives such as the diaphragm and cervical cap. The 1960s introduction of the IUD and oral contraceptives for women gave a sense of freedom from barrier contraception. Sex education campaigns also became popularized as a result of the Comstock Law's repeal. The essay The Myth of the Vaginal Orgasm, published in 1970 by Anne Coit, discovered an understanding of a woman's sexual anatomy. The female anatomy was now supported by scientific fact and reasoning as well as how and why women orgasm the way they do. This essay challenged the conception many had during this era and eras previous that women were a sexually inferior appendage to men. The early 1970s also gave way to one of the most influential reproductive health cases in United States history. A pregnant single woman under the pseudonym Roe brought a class action suit challenging the constitutionality of the Texas criminal abortion laws, which prohibit abortions except in cases where the mother's life is threatened. She wished to terminate her pregnancy by abortion, performed by a competent licensed physician under safe clinical conditions. The conditions being what they were in Texas, Roe was unable to receive a legal abortion because her pregnancy was not deemed dangerous to her life. She was also unable to travel to another jurisdiction in which legal abortion was available because she lacked the money to do so. Her case claimed that the Texas statutes in place were unconstitutionally vague and that they abridged her right of personal privacy, protected by the First, Fourth, Fifth, Ninth, and 14th Amendments.
The Supreme Court today ruled that abortion is completely a private matter to be decided by mother and doctor in the first 3 months of pregnancy.
This decision effectively nullified any anti-abortion legislation in place throughout the country and legalized abortions, which had an overwhelmingly positive impact on female reproductive rights. Overall, the counterculture that developed between the 1960s and 1980s strove to explore the body and mind and challenge the moral and legal confines of the United States. The sexual revolution of the 1960s was a transformation rooted in the conviction that the erotic should be celebrated, not suppressed. Planned Parenthood is an organization that truly embodies the modern views of acceptance and toleration. Beginning in 1916, Margaret Sanger and two other women, Ethel Byrne and Fania Mendel, opened the first birth control clinic in the United States in New York City, where they distributed birth control advice, and birth control information. However, Sanger and her counterparts were arrested and jailed for being in direct violation of the Comstock Law of 1873, which barred the distribution of information regarding abortion and birth control. The women took their case to the Court of Appeals, where they were convicted on misdemeanor charges. But the judge who made the final ruling made a modification to the law which allowed for physician-prescribed birth control. These court actions also had an overbearing effect on the future of female reproductive rights. They inspired a growth in campaigns for changes in laws governing birth control and sex education that would shape the women's movement of the early and mid-20th century and allow for big strides to be made regarding female reproductive health. In 1921, continuing their operation, the clinic was organized into the American Birth Control League, which was later renamed Planned Parenthood, and by 1941 the organization operated 222 centers and clinics. They also advocate for the legal and political protection of reproductive rights in the U.S., and, as an organization, directly oppose restrictions on women's reproductive health services. Several branches of the Planned Parenthood Federation have involved themselves in numerous appeals before the Supreme Court regarding the protection of reproductive health. One being a requested change to the Missouri law encompassing parental consent for minors and required spousal consent for abortion services. Planned Parenthood today is the single largest provider of reproductive health services in the U.S., with over 650 affiliated clinics operating in the country. In their 2014 annual report, they stated that they performed approximately 9.5 million discrete services, including 324,000 legal abortions. Planned Parenthood has played an extremely influential part in the lives of Americans by supporting and helping others exercise their right to choose. The organization has received federal funding since 1970, when President Richard Nixon signed into law the Family Planning Services and Population Research Act. Title 10 of that law provides funding for family planning services, including contraception and family planning information. However, the sanctity of the Planned Parenthood organization and other clinics alike have recently been jeopardized with Donald Trump's intentions of defunding institutions that provide abortions. It would be the first time in nearly 50 years that the organization would go without federal funding, which would make it nearly impossible for it to remain functioning. And, while Planned Parenthood is the largest single provider of abortions in the U.S., pro-choice advocates have argued that the organization's family planning services reduce the need for abortion, kind of making it the United States' leading abortion preventer as well. Ultimately, the battle over the morality of abortion is one that will most likely never be won. However, denying an individual her personal right to choose as well as rejecting her entitlement to privacy is unconstitutional and wrong. The Trump administration is not the first to pass legislation barring women's access to family planning services, but it has reversed much of the strife that advocates of women's rights and reproductive health have endured, leaving many asking, how far have women's rights truly come?